back to my channel. I hope that you were seeing my face after seeing some version of an introduction to this video that I'm super excited about. I feel like in my mind I have an idea of what I want to create for like an intro, commercially type of thing, but who knows if editing Steph is going to be able to execute that. And I'm also filming this on Saturday, the 16th of March, and I'm hopeful that I'll get this video up tomorrow on Sunday, but I'm also like very uncertain and very unconfident. Is unconfident a word? I don't know. Very non-confident in my potential ability to get this video up in a timely manner. We'll see. But I was recently watching Sophie Alexandra's palette battle video, and I was reading through her comments, and someone in the comments said, would love to see this style of video, but like a tournament. And my mind, my brain got to like spinning around, and I had this wild idea. You know, March Madness is upon us. It starts, I believe, on March 22nd, which I'm so excited for March Madness. I love sports, you guys, and I'm also just a super competitive person. So I love all things competition, and I love to fill out my March Madness brackets every single year. So I thought to myself, is it a crazy idea if I were to do a March Madness ultimate palette tournament and put all of my eyeshadow palettes head to head against one another until we come to the ultimate winner? And I thought, girl, that's a little wild, especially considering you have over 160 eyeshadow palettes. That's like multiple rounds of 64. But then I was like, also sounds like so much fun. So you guys, I have these brackets. Can you see, or is it too sunny? I have brackets filled out. So I have 2 round of 64 brackets, as well as a round of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, as well as a round of 32. And I want to say, I thought I had, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. I have currently in my collection, to the best of my knowledge, 167 eyeshadow palettes. There's a few in my collection I haven't even tested one time. I'm thinking of like the Odin's Eye collection that recently launched, as well as a new one from It's Belle Cosmetics. So this is the majority, the bulk of my eyeshadow palette collection. It's 160 eyeshadow palettes going head to head. So this tournament, if you will, is going to be broken up into multiple parts. And today I'm very curious how long it's going to take us to get through. Like, can we get through all of these head to heads, or are we going to have to split even this up? Even the first round, are we going to have to split up into multiple rounds? I'd like to get through the first round all in one video. We'll see how it goes. So I'm not quite sure how many parts this series is going to be broken up into. I'm thinking at least 3, and then I'm thinking when the winner is deemed, maybe I'll do like an eyeshadow look with the winner. That's what's currently going on up in this brain. To create these brackets, I had all of my 160 eyeshadow palettes listed in my Tiny Decisions app, and I literally would spin, and I did no repeats, and I would just spin and fill the bracket out. So like, for example, the first spin I had was the Natasha Denona Pastel, so that's in this spot. Then we had Persona 1, then we had Odin's Eye, the Tina palette, which actually will be taken out. Then we had Adept Ninhadrin, Desert Monsoon, etc, etc. So that's how I filled these brackets out. So it's completely random. I will say there are some really difficult matchups in here. The one that's sticking out most in my mind is Kaleidos Sashimi City is battling against Natasha Denona Mini Nude in round 1. Like, that doesn't even seem fair, but that is what this video is going to be today. So if you're interested in round 1 of my eyeshadow palette tournament for 2024, if you're all on board with this wild idea, I hope you'll continue to watch. If you have yet to subscribe, I hope you'll consider subscribing before moving on. If you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, wild ideas, we do it all over here, and I would love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. We do have a palette week starting next week, which I'm so excited about. So I hope you consider subscribing if you have not yet. But other than that, let's get in to the tournament. Okay, you guys, it took me probably like an hour and a half to fill the bracket out and then like lay my palettes out in order of these battles, if you will, in order of these rounds. And like I said, I have no idea how long this is gonna take. I feel like for round one, I'm not gonna go super in depth on like why I'm picking one palette over another unless it's like a super difficult decision. I'm just gonna very quickly kind of like go for it. And then as we like narrow down to like Sweet 16 and things like that, then I'll give you more information. But let's jump into it. For round number one, we have the Natasha Denona Pastel against one of my all-time favorite eyeshadow palettes, the Persona Identity 1 palette. So this one really is no competition to me. We are gonna be going with the Persona Identity 1 palette. This one would be advancing to the next round. The next battle, we have another Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette. We have the Natasha Denona Sunrise eyeshadow palette against the against the Adept Cosmetics Ninhydrin. I'm not gonna open this one up because it looks nothing like the Sunrise palette because I currently have custom Natasha Denona midis going, but it doesn't matter because Adept Ninhydrin is going to easily take this round. This is such a beautiful eyeshadow palette, so not a hard decision on this one. All right, next up we have the What's Up Beauty Desert Monsoon eyeshadow palette against the Natasha Denona Mini Retro eyeshadow palette. Okay, this is a difficult one. I really love the Natasha Denona Mini Retro for something just quick, simple, and easy. But I also really love Desert Monsoon for some of its beautiful shimmers, and it does have a good range of mattes as well. I think I'm gonna have to go with Desert Monsoon for this round. Desert Monsoon is going to advance. I'm really sorry, Natasha Denona Mini Retro. This maybe feels like a little bit of an upset, if you will, but it's gonna be Desert Monsoon advancing to the second round. All right, next up we have the Huda Beauty Grunge eyeshadow palette against the It's Belle, the Flare eyeshadow palette. So we have one of my favorite eyeshadow brands against a 9-pan all shimmer palette. And I feel like many of the viewers, maybe many viewers at home, if they were filling out brackets in advance and knew like the matchups, they would assume Grunge was gonna win, but I feel like we have yet another upset, and I'm actually gonna go with the It's Belle Cosmetics, the Flare eyeshadow palette. Now granted, this is more of a companion eyeshadow palette, but I really love all 9 shades that are included in this palette, and I feel like I'm a little bit limited with the looks that I can create with the Huda Grunge palette, although it is an 18-pan eyeshadow palette. So while this may seem like a winner, I'm actually going to be advancing the It's Belle, the Flare eyeshadow palette. And Huda Beauty Grunge, unfortunately, is going home early. All right, next we have the Sigma Corderosa eyeshadow palette up against Melt Mary Jane, which looks like this. And I am definitely gonna have to go with, can I open these both at the same time? I'm gonna go with Sigma Corderosa because Melt Mary Jane is just too difficult to work with. She's just too high maintenance. I do really enjoy the looks that I get when I create looks with this eyeshadow palette, but this one is much more easy to work with. So we're gonna go with Sigma Corderosa advancing to the next round. All right, next up we have 2 indie brands against one another. So I have the Menagerie Pastel Pup eyeshadow palette up against Fantasy Cosmetica Druid. And this one is really difficult because I do really like each of these eyeshadow palettes kind of for very different purposes and also very different seasons, but I'm gonna have to give it to the why do I always want to say Natasha Denona? I'm gonna have to give it to the Fantasy Cosmetica Druid palette. I just enjoy this eyeshadow palette more. I find this color story easier to reach for on an everyday basis or just a more frequent basis. And while I do enjoy this eyeshadow palette, I definitely reach for Druid over Pastel. So Fantasy Druid is going to be advancing to the next round, while Menagerie Pastel Pup unfortunately is making its way home. All right, this next one is an interesting matchup. So we have Urban Decay Stone Vibes, which is such a beautiful, kind of underrated eyeshadow palette. Obviously you can't get that one anymore, it's limited edition. And this one is gonna be up against the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 1, which is just such a beautiful, everyday, kind of neutral palette. Now I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, is my 1? Is my 1 actually like moldy, or is it just, maybe not, okay, maybe not. Maybe though. Feels a little bit extra textured. Anyway, that does make me a little bit nervous about this eyeshadow palette. Although I thought it was just Patrick Ta 1 that was like growing mold. Anyway, it just looks like there's like, it's like those hard, like, I don't want to say crystals, but that's kind of what it looks like. Anyway, I love the Patrick Ta mattes. Now I feel like I don't know if I can pick this one though. I'm like, Okay, I kind of like swirled my finger around and swatched the shades that were like interesting. And you know, there's nothing like suspect, you know, in these swatches at least. Anyway, well shoot, for the mattes I was gonna let this one advance, but now I'm like, I feel it's so difficult because I feel like for the mattes like this and for everyday, this is definitely more of an everyday reach. But I'm a little bit concerned about those shades, and I know people have had issues with their Patrick Ta palettes molding. Now I don't know if Patrick Ta 1, but Patrick Ta 2 for sure, which kind of is making me want to go for this, even though my heart tells me, why is this one so difficult? I feel like I might have to go, clearly this is like an overtime tiebreaker sort of situation. Something is telling me to choose the Urban Decay Stone Vibes, even though as I was laying these out yesterday, I was like, oh, this one's easily gonna take the cake. I feel like this one was doing some shady things in overtime. Like there was some fouls that this one was doing that like we just aren't a fan of. So we're gonna say that Urban Decay Stone Vibes won in overtime, and this one will be advancing to the next round. Okay, this is another difficult one. We have the Pat McGrath Subliminal Eyeshadow Palette, which I get looks extremely boring on the outside, against one of my all-time favorite neutral eyeshadow palettes. We have NARS Summer Solstice. And this one is really difficult because I feel like while this one looks really boring, I really love this eyeshadow palette to create some more like subtle blue looks. But I also just have such a fond place in my heart for NARS Summer Solstice that this one is another really close battle, but I'm gonna have to go with NARS Summer Solstice, and we're gonna send Pat McGrath Subliminal home. All right, next up, this one's an easy one. We have the Natasha Denona Mini Starlit against the Lethal Cosmetics Mini Serenade, and this one is a no-brainer. I'm going with the Lethal Cosmetics Midnight Serenade. There's just so many beautiful shades, beautiful metallic sparkle shifty special shades within this eyeshadow palette, and then this one is just a bunch of regurgitated Natasha Denona shades. So we're going with Midnight Serenade on to the next round. And then I have the Glamlight Cake palette right here against the Adept Heather Austin eyeshadow palette. Two indie brands, two really beautiful palettes, but I definitely feel more inclined to reach for the Adept Heather Austin palette. While this is a really beautiful, very great quality rainbow eyeshadow palette to have in my collection, it's just not something I reach for frequently at all. In fact, it's going in my No Pan Left Behind, and I literally can't get myself to reach for this one. So we're gonna give it to Heather Austin, advancing to the next round. The next battle has two kind of similar color stories. So we have the Natasha Denona Gold palette versus Urban Decay Stone Vibes, and it's no question, we know how much I love Natasha Denona Gold. I do really like this color story, and if this was against a different eyeshadow palette, I definitely could have seen this advancing to another round, but we've got an MVP over here. So Natasha Denona Gold is gonna take this round. And then we have the Alter Ego Artemis palette against the Adept Minka eyeshadow palette. And this is a really interesting battle because I really like the color story and the variety within the Artemis palette, but then I also really like the just molten metallic shimmers that I'm getting with the Adept Minka palette. And if I'm being like true to myself, if someone said I had to declutter one or the other of these, I would likely give up my Artemis palette. Even though it'd be really difficult, I feel like I just need to like actually show this palette some more love, but I really enjoy this palette for the textures and just how intense the metallics are in Adept Minka. So I'm gonna have to give it to Minka, and Minka will be advancing to the next round. Okay, next up I have two small palettes against one another. I have my Rowan Mood Forever quad against my Natasha Denona Mini Pastel, and I'm gonna have to give it to to Rowan Mood Forever. I absolutely definitely love the Rowan formula. I just think they make some really, really special shades. And while I do really like this color story as a companion palette, this just doesn't get a lot of love for me on its own. So Rowan Mood Forever is going to be advancing. And then we have another Natasha Denona mini. We have the Mini Biba against a larger, and one of my other shades just fell out. All right, we have Mini Biba against Xenon. And this is actually really difficult because this is definitely not like an everyday color story, whereas this kind of is. Ooh, but I do love the shimmers in here. Whereas this one I find frustrating to work with, but then I always get like compliments when I wear this eyeshadow palette. I think I'm gonna have to go with Mini Biba, and we're gonna send Xenon all the way home. All right, this next one is a no-brainer for me personally. We have Moira Fun is in the Air against Unearthly's Fall Magic, and hands down it has to go to Unearthly Fall Magic. Not only do I like the color story in this one better, but the quality of this formula, or of Unearthly's formula, is truly unmatched, especially compared to Moira, which I just don't think has the best eyeshadow formula. So we're gonna give it to Unearthly Fall Magic. And then the last battle in this round of 32 on this side is the Ensley Groovy Gardens palette, which I haven't reached for a ton yet, pitted against the ColourPop Low Ray of Sunshine, which I do really love Low Ray of Sunshine. It's served me really well in its lifetime with me, but it is a 9-pan all matte palette, and I already know, even though I haven't reached for all the colors in the Groovy Garden palette, I really enjoy the Ensley Rain formula, and this color story is beautiful, the packaging is beautiful. So Ensley Rain Groovy Gardens is going to be moving on and advancing. All right, you guys, moving on. We have reached the battle that I have been personally dreading. We have Kaleido Sashimi City against Natasha Denona Mini Nude. One has 6 shades, one has 5. This one definitely has more like sparkly, special, iridescent shimmers, but this also I just love. So I think I'm gonna have to give it to Mini Nude, but that's a really tough one. Yes, just because I feel like in its lifetime I reached for Mini Nude more, and this is something that is, it's Mini Nude. It's Mini Nude. We're moving on. We're not thinking too much more about it. All right, next up, this is another tough one. So I have the Odin's Eye Hella 2 collab. This is the Trick or Treat palette. Really, really beautiful color story against the Bella Beauté Bar Angles of Illumination eyeshadow palette. And so this is difficult because I absolutely love that. I love both. This though is an all shimmer palette, while this one does have some mattes. However, I've just been loving some of the shimmers out of the Angles of Illumination eyeshadow palette. Plus it's versatile because it has magnetic pans that I can remove. But I do really love some of the shades out. This is so difficult, but I think I'm gonna have to go with Angles of Illumination. But that is a really difficult one. But Angles of Illumination is gonna move on to the next round. And then next I have the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde eyeshadow palette against the Aether Beauty Rose Quartz Crystal Quad. This one is not hard at all. I mean, we're comparing a quad to an eyeshadow palette, but I'm gonna go with Huda Mercury Retrograde. More shades, more memories, more love attached to this one. So we're gonna be saying adios to the Rose Quartz Quad. And then I have the Odin's Eye Lil Ghost palette. This is another tough one against the Natasha Denona Biba eyeshadow palette. Ooh. Ooh, this is so tough because obviously for everyday I'd be going with this. But I love the color story on this one. It really just depends on my mood. Okay, this one is so tough, you guys. I really don't know what to do. I think I'm gonna have to go with Biba just because every day this is more versatile and wearable for me and like my lifestyle. But it would really pain me to not have the Lil Ghost eyeshadow palette, but yet Lil Ghost is headed home. Okay, this is also another really difficult one. We have two really beautiful indie eyeshadow palettes. pitted against one another. So we have the Bella Beauté Bar Basic Witch Eyeshadow Palette, which is such a fun color story. So many amazing shifty shades. And we have that against the What's Up Beauty Dragon Eye Eyeshadow Palette, which also just has some really, really, really beautiful shades. And a more wearable, probably everyday color story, but I just don't feel like I can deny the specialness that is in some of the shades in the Bella Beauté Bar Basic Witch Eyeshadow Palette. So it does pain me that Dragon Eye is headed home in the first round, but Basic Witch is going to be advancing. And then we have the ColourPop Gettin' Fresh Eyeshadow Palette against the Odin's Eye Flora Story Eyeshadow Palette, and I'm definitely giving it to Flora Story. It is a more condensed color story. It's purples and greens, which I love. And some of these shades just are not my favorite out of the Gettin' Fresh palette. So we're gonna go with Flora Story. All right, next up, we have this Pat McGrath eyeshadow palette, which I don't know which one this is, but this is what it looks like, very beautiful. And we have that against, this is not gonna look similar because again, I have custom midi palettes, but against Natasha Denona Zendo, and I'm definitely going with this one from Pat McGrath. I did not love the Natasha Denona Zendo palette, and I think this is a really fun color story from Pat McGrath. So Pat McGrath is moving on. Then I have the ColourPop Tinkerbell eyeshadow palette against the Artist Couture Supreme Bronze eyeshadow palette, and I have to give it to Artist Couture Supreme Bronze. I think this is a really good quality eyeshadow formula. I like the color story. I can wear this every day. I can create really beautiful, sultry, warm eyeshadow looks with this. I love the sleek packaging, and the ColourPop Tinkerbell formula just wasn't like outstanding in my opinion, so we're going with Supreme Bronze. All right, next up we have Kaleidos number 3. Which one is this? Futures in Pink maybe? Against the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2. And I am going to go with Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2. I've recently No Pan Left Behind in this eyeshadow palette and freaking loved it. And I just can never get myself to even reach for this. So we're going Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2. And then next round we have the Natasha Denona Mini Love palette, which I do really like. But I really like this eyeshadow palette because I love this shade as an inner corner. I don't feel like I get a ton of use out of the rest of the palette. And this one is going up against the Kaleidos Escape Pod, which I really, really love for just a fun color story. So I'm gonna give it to Kaleidos Escape Pod. More shades, more fun colors, really exceptional quality. So this one will be advancing. All right, then we have the Melt Cosmetics Earth Bad Side Zodiac palette against the Glaminatrix Rich Romantic eyeshadow palette. This one is tough because they're very different color stories, and I actually really enjoy both of these eyeshadow palettes. This one's definitely more grungy, whereas this is definitely more like, this is more fall, this is more like spring. I feel like I'm gonna have to give it to Glaminatrix Rich Romantic just because the shades in here, like some of the duochromes are just really, really special in the Rich Romantic. So we're gonna go Rich Romantic, but that one was hard. That one was hard. Unfortunately, Bad Side Zodiac, the Earth palette, is going home. And then I have the Pat McGrath Divine Rose eyeshadow palette. And this is an interesting one because I feel like both these are cool toned, higher end palettes against the Natasha Denona Glam eyeshadow palette. I'm definitely giving it to Natasha Denona Glam. I personally just don't love this one from Pat McGrath. This is probably my least favorite of the Mothership palettes. I find it to be the most boring, the least creatively inspiring, and it's just not a favorite. So Pat McGrath, or not Pat McGrath, Natasha Denona Glam is moving on to the next round. All right, next up we have Juvia's The Pinks, which I've actually depotted 3 of my shades because, spoiler, I will be decluttering this palette, so this probably will be a pretty easy round. I have that against my Nomad Cosmetics Okavango Safari palette. Definitely giving it to the Safari palette. Love the color story and like the formula a lot more. So that one will be moving on. And then I have the ColourPop Cabana Club eyeshadow palette against ABH Jackie. Does this even seem fair? We know how much I love the ABH Jackie eyeshadow palette, so I think the answer is clear. ABH Jackie will be moving on in this round. All right, next up we have the Pat McGrath Blue, the Interstellar Icon Quad against the Nabla Cosmetics Read My Mind eyeshadow palette. So obviously we're getting a lot more shades within the Read My Mind, but I just have not felt excited about this palette, and I actually really enjoy this Pat McGrath quad. So Interstellar Icon is actually going to be advancing to the next round. And then the last battle within this first set of 64, we have the Utopian palette from Pat McGrath against the Natasha Denona Retrogram eyeshadow palette. And I'm gonna give this one to the Utopian eyeshadow palette. I just think the color story is a little bit more fun. I do enjoy using Retroglam, and again, mine probably looks a little bit different, but this one is just a little bit more fun, a little bit more sparkly, and I just feel like this one deserves to move on to the next round. Okay, I feel like we're like maybe 30 minutes or possibly even less into this video. And while I feel like I need a little bit more lip gloss, I feel like we can keep going. We're gonna keep going on to the next round of 64, and we're gonna try and get the first round done all in this video. By the way, I am wearing yet again the Huda Beauty Faux Filter lip gloss. I really like this. I still hold true to thinking Lawless Forget the Filler is superior. Next up, we have the Bella Beauté Bar Dead Roses eyeshadow palette against Lawless, the glam one. It's definitely Bella Beauté Bar. Just more shades, more special shades, better quality. Need I say more? I think not. Then we have ColourPop The Wild Child versus BH Cosmetics 90s Dance Remix. I'm gonna give it to ColourPop Wild Child. I really like this color story for a more mid to deep kind of sultry warm brown look, and I just do not find myself reaching for this color story that frequently. So Wild Child moves on. And then we have, I thought this was interesting because both of these are kind of like remind me of a safari. So we have the Huda Beauty Wild Tiger against Natasha Denona Yucca. I also really love both of these brands, but I'm gonna have to give it to the Natasha Denona Yucca just because there's more colors in here. There's greens, and I freaking just love this eyeshadow palette. I still really enjoy this one too, but if I had to choose one or the other, it's gonna be the Yucca, so Yucca moves on. And then we have the, oh, I also thought this was an interesting pairing because I felt like the color stories were kind of similar. And also, again, we have Natasha Denona against Huda Beauty. So we have the Lila palette against the Naughty Nudes. And this one is tough because I feel like overall I can reach for this one. Like I can have an easier time creating looks with the Huda Beauty Naughty Nudes. But then there's like some shades in the Lila palette that I really do love that I don't necessarily get with Naughty Nudes, but I still feel like my heart is telling me to advance Naughty Nudes, so that's what we're gonna do. All right, next up, this one's a tough one. So we have Huda Beauty, not Huda, geez Louise, can I get things right? We have Rowan 1111, which you guys know how much I love this quad, but it's pitted against the Ensley Rain Cold Moon. It doesn't even seem fair because this is a quad and this is a very beautiful, also cool tone palette, so I'm gonna have to go Ensley Rain. I feel like that one's a no-brainer. Then I have the Nabla Cutie Nude Eyeshadow Palette against the Too Faced Italian Spritz Eyeshadow Palette. This one also hardly seems fair. I really like both of these, but I'm also getting, this is 18 shades versus 6 shades. Granted, this is obviously more nude and this has a bit more color, but I really loved the Too Faced Italian Spritz last year, so I'm gonna have to give it to Too Faced Italian Spritz, and that's gonna move on. Next up, I have the Kaleidos Lilac palette against Natasha Denona My Dream, and I'm gonna give it to My Dream. I just really enjoy this one. I struggled to reach for lilac, so My Dream it is. Then I have the Nabla Glitter Lights quad, which I actually really enjoy and have been reaching for the last few days here and enjoying it. And I have that one against the Odin's Eye Jewels and Gem eyeshadow palette. This also hardly seems fair because this is a quad, it's glitter, it's pressed glitters, and I also love Odin's Eye, so I'm gonna have to give it to the Odin's Eye Jewels and Gem. Really beautiful color story, beautiful eyeshadow palette, and that is gonna be the one that advances on. All right guys, this one I feel like is relatively easy. We have the Odin's Eye Christmas palette against the Glaminatrix Nocturnal. I really love this color story, especially for spooky season, but the quality in this one is just unmatched. So this one is definitely going to the Christmas palette from Odin's Eye. And then I have the Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette against the Huda Beauty Wild Jaguar palette. And this one is tough because one is cool toned, one is warm tone. I actually really like both of these, but but I feel like Dominique Cosmetics Latte would be more wearable, just easier to create. This one's just deep, whereas this one kind of has a little bit more variety. So I'm gonna give it to the Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette. All right, then I have the Oden's Eye Christmas Eve eyeshadow palette against the Aether Beauty Summer Solstice eyeshadow palette. Both are beautiful palettes, and honestly Summer Solstice is probably more everyday appropriate than I find the Christmas Eve palette to be. But I love blue eyeshadows and I love Oden's Eye, and I'm gonna have to give it to the Christmas Eve palette. And then this one hardly seems fair at all, but this is the tournament, or yeah, this is the tournament. I have the Danessa Myricks Volume 4 against my LH Cosmetics Shimmer Saga. It's gonna be the Danessa Myricks. Okay, this one is so hard. I have the Unearthly Cosmetics Sorcerer's Smoke, and this is going against the Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction eyeshadow palette, and I really love both of these eyeshadow palettes. I love this blue brown shade. There's some really beautiful textured sparkly shades in Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction, but then you have Unearthly Cosmetics Sorcerer's Smoke, which just has so many beautiful neutral mattes, but also the like special unearthly shimmer formula. This is so tough, but I think I'm gonna have to give it to Unearthly Sorcerer's Smoke. And Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction is unfortunately going home early. The next matchup is the Sydney Grace Tiny Marvels palette against the NARS Stargaze eyeshadow palette, which we know how much I love the NARS eyeshadow palettes and the eyeshadow formula, but there's no denying the beauty, the color story, the formula within Sydney Grace and the Tiny Marvels palette. Mel did such a good job creating this. So Tiny Marvels will be advancing to the next round. Next round, we have the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz against the Alter Ego Canyon palette. Both really beautiful color stories, more on the neutral side. One just leaning more warm brown, while the other leans more of like a romantic, dusty mauve-y sort of pink. And I'm definitely giving it to Huda Beauty Rose Quartz. I absolutely love this eyeshadow palette. You can literally pry this from my cold, dead fingies, which just reminded me I meant to paint my fingernails last night, so ignore how nasty they look. All right, in this round of 32, we have the Too Faced Pumpkin Spice eyeshadow palette against Ensley Rune's Flower Moon, which I have not finished testing Flower Moon, but I'm also gonna advance Flower Moon because you can't deny the really beautiful textured, sparkly, metallic, foiled, all the things sort of shades from Ensley Rune. So we're advancing Flower Moon. Sorry, Pumpkin Spice. Another day. All right, next up we have the Kaleidos Escape Pod. And this one, ooh, this is an interesting pairing because I actually feel like there's like a bit, I don't want to say necessarily of overlap in color stories, but like a little bit. Like this is kind of a condensed version of the Kaleidos Escape Pod. Which one? Ooh, this is so tough because this has like the two neutral browns. I was thinking like, of course I was gonna go with the Escape Pod, but now I'm like rethinking that decision. Ooh, what do I do? Shoot, this is like another like they're going to overtime sort of situation. I actually think I'm gonna, ooh, am I? Okay, let me look at them. But I do like that I have like the, okay, Kaleidos Escape Pod is indeed advancing, but that was a really close one. It was a really close one, but what stole the show for me, I would be sad to be missing some of the extra shimmers in this palette. So Escape Pod is escaping to the next round. All right, next battle. This one isn't gonna look the same, but we have Natasha Denona Love versus Dose of Colors Baked Browns. We're gonna give it to Baked Browns, because this is just an easier reach for me than the Natasha Denona Love palette, personally. Okay, you guys, next up we have the OG, the absolute OG, the Tartelette in Bloom against NARS Climax. And I will say, I've been No Pan Left Behinding NARS Climax, and I definitely appreciate it more than I did before I started No Pan Left Behinding. But Tartelette in Bloom just holds such a special place in my heart because I've repurchased this one, I love it so much. So I think I'm gonna have to go with Tartelette in Bloom just because I've definitely gotten a ton more use out of this one too. And like if I was traveling, I would take this palette over this palette. So Tartelette in Bloom is going to advance to the next round. And then we have the Gloomy Gardens palette from, is it Diveroon Cosmetics? And this is actually what's on my eyes today. And this is pitted up against the Too Faced The Natural Nudes eyeshadow palette. And I'm gonna go with the Diveroon Gloomy Gardens palette just because it's more fun. Yes, this is definitely more everyday, easy to work with, but I have had so much fun with this, and the shimmers or the special shifty shades in this eyeshadow palette are absolutely stunning. So Gloomy Gardens is advancing. Okay, I feel like this pairing is really difficult. We have the What's Up Beauty Geodes palette versus the Huda Beauty Empowered palette, and I really enjoy both of these. This one is a really beautiful, like, deeper, warm toned palette, and again, so many different textures and tones within the Huda Beauty eyeshadow palettes. This one is a few less shades, but definitely more diversity amongst colors. You have a blue brown shade, you have some pinks, some purples. This one is actually really tough. There's like some very specific looks I love with the Empowered palette, but then I like love Citrine here for like an inner corner, and I feel like I just have more range in terms of colors with the Geodes palette. So I think I'm actually gonna advance Geodes. I feel like this is a bit of an upset. Like I feel like I was expecting I was gonna pick Empowered, but I'm actually gonna go What's Up Beauty Geodes for the win. All right, next up we have the ABH Cosmos palette against the Pat McGrath Voyeuristic Vixen quad. It's definitely going to ABH Cosmos. I recently No Pan Left Behind to this quad, and while I like it and I think that this special shade is really beautiful, I definitely love the looks that I create, and obviously I'm offered more of a variety with ABH Cosmos. So Cosmos is going to be advancing. And then this is also an interesting pairing. I think I know what I'm gonna choose, but you know, more difficult. We have got two fun palettes pitted against one another. So we have the Nomad Cosmetics Ghost Town palette against the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. And I am gonna advance Natasha Denona I Need a Nude, but it does pain me that this one is leaving us the first round, because I do think this is a really beautiful eyeshadow palette, a fun color story. You definitely are offered more of a variety of colors within this palette, but this is just such a beautiful everyday neutral. I don't even have to think about it. If I want just like a neutral, cool leaning base, I've been reaching into this eyeshadow palette a lot, so we're gonna advance the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. Okay, then we have, okay, this is another like extremely difficult one. We have ColourPop Limoncello. This like doesn't even seem fair. Against the Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction. Like this just isn't really even fair. I don't feel like these two should be against one another. I love them both so much for different reasons, but I do feel like I'm just left with more options, and this is something I feel like I reach for more frequently. I do love reaching into Bronze Seduction for, especially if I'm doing a green look, for just like a lid topper to add just a little extra sparkly green. But in terms of creating everyday wear, everyday looks, this has come traveling with me so frequently, whereas this one has not. And even if I wasn't as worried about these shadows breaking, I still feel like I would travel more with this color story over this color story. So I actually think I'm shocking myself, and this is again a bit of an upset, because when I was creating these brackets last night and these two were paired against one another, I'm like, ooh, it's probably gonna be Bronze Seduction. But in an upset, Limoncello is actually gonna advance to the next round. All right, this next one for me is a no-brainer. We have Viseart Soleil La Plague against Glamlight Retro Reggae Viseart for the win. Okay, my camera battery died and my camera cut me off, so I don't remember where I was at. But what I was trying to say is I'm not super impressed with the Scooby-Doo Retro Reggae palette, so it's really an easy pick because I really, really love this one from Viseart. So Viseart moves on. Another easy one for me, because I am really not a fan of the ColourPop On Cloud 9, which, has anyone seen the newest 9-pan release from ColourPop? I want to say it's called like the Elemental palette. It is literally this palette, but 3 less shades. Am I right? Anyway, this is going up against, and I'm sorry for the noise, this is going up against the Glamlight Ice Cream Dream palette, and it's gonna be Ice Cream Dream. This is a phenomenal eyeshadow palette, great color story, great quality, so that is gonna be moving on. All right, then I have Melt Gemini, and this is gonna be a tough one against Adept Plain Jane Remastered. An all shimmer palette versus a really beautiful grungy palette, but this one takes just a little bit more effort to work with. However, I do really like the grungy mattes in Melt Gemini, and I feel like this palette just holds a special place in my heart. Plus, there's been so many other Adept palettes that have already moved on in the tournament, so we're gonna give it to Melt Gemini for this round. Right, next up we have the Sugar Pill Fun Size palette against the ABH Nuevo palette, and while I do really like Sugar Pill Fun Size, I think it's really cute and really a fun color story, I'm gonna give it to ABH Nueva. This is definitely, or Nuevo, however you say it. This is definitely more everyday color story. I do like that it has like the pop of lavender. I really like this kind of like camo green shade as well. So really beautiful palette. This one will be moving on. Okay, this is a tough one, but I think I know what my heart's telling me. We have the Odenside Sea Talk versus the Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice. My Sugar and Spice looks just a little bit different because I've traded out a couple of the matte shades that it originally came with a couple of ColourPop matte shades, and I think I'm gonna have to give it to Odenside Sea Talk. I really like the special shades in this eyeshadow palette, but not a huge fan of like the color story in general. And while there's a couple of shades that give me a little bit of finickiness in the Odenside Sea Talk, I love Lauren from Lauren May Beauty, so extra points for that. But I also just love this color story. I love the shade Electric Kelp. Iridescent Shell is also so beautiful. This is just beautiful. So Sea Talk is moving on to the next round. Then we have the Huda Beauty Neon Eyeshadow Palette. And you guys are already gonna, like, it's not even a question. It's against Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3. We know who's moving on. It's Volume 3. And then we have Dose of Colors Friendcation against, you guys, and oh, there it is. There it is. Against Rowan 75 Degrees. Tough, but I'm gonna give it to Friendcation. She has more shades, she's an OG, and if I didn't have her, what even would I wear to a country music concert? I'm not sure. So Friendcation is gonna be moving on. All right, and then we have the last round in this round of 64, but we still have the other round of 32, you guys. We still got a lot of palettes going up against each other. The tournament, round one tournament, not over. We have Pat McGrath Subliminal against Cosmic Brushes The Muse, and it's gonna go to Cosmic Brushes The Muse. Significantly less expensive, more shades, better quality, beautiful eyeshadow palette. So Muse is moving on, which brings us to our final round of 32. So in this round, we have the Odenside Hella against the Unearthly Resurgence palette. And I'm gonna have to give this to Hella only because I haven't finished testing Resurgence, and this is like my most used palette of 2022 and one of my top used palettes of 2023. So Hella's gonna take it, but I'm still very excited to finish testing this one because it is also so beautiful, and I also really enjoy Heather Austin. All right, next up we have two Odenside palettes against one another, and this is so tough because I really like both of these, but we have Planet Spirit against the Odenside Stone and Rock eyeshadow palette. Really fun, bright, colorful palette against a beautiful grungy green eyeshadow palette. I am gonna have to give it to Stone and Rock, just mostly for this green and this green alone in the shade High Spirits. Such a beautiful shade. I feel like I can like call out this eyeshadow palette whenever I see someone wearing it. It just like has this very specific look to it that's so beautiful. I also love green eyeshadows, so it's kind of a no-brainer, but I also really enjoy the Planet Spirit. That was a tough one. That's a tough one. Next up, I have the Unearthly Not Normal eyeshadow palette against the Natasha Denona Retro eyeshadow palette. Again, retro is going to look different, but for this round, I'm going to go with Natasha Denona Retro. I really, really enjoy the color story of Retro. Quality was really, really good, and it's just a solid palette, whereas I do not find myself gravitating to reach for this color story. I just don't find myself reaching for this. So okay, then we have two more indie eyeshadow brands against one another. So I have a new to me brand, which I've started testing this palette but haven't finished. This is the Blend Bunny Surge eyeshadow palette against the Menagerie Killer Purr eyeshadow palette. So bright, colorful neons versus this really, really beautiful, grungy, kind of safari-esque palette. I've really enjoyed some of the looks that I've created with this, and I just have not tested this one enough, but the mattes are so impressive with this. Ooh, this is tough. Mostly because I feel like I'm gonna have to give it to Blend Bunny. Like, the neons are so unique to my collection. I really love the Killer Purr palette for the shade Maine. I'm giving this one a pass, you know? It's like one of those up and coming teams, and it's moving on to the next round. Killer Purr is going home. All right, another tough battle. We have the Glam Light Chocolate Martini palette against the ColourPop Miss Piggy eyeshadow palette. Love this for a really beautiful kind of neutral palette with a bit of a twist, and then love this palette for just like a fun color story. I'm gonna give it to ColourPop Miss Piggy. Miss Piggy's gonna be moving on. I just had so much fun playing around with this eyeshadow palette and can't wait to grab for it again. So Miss Piggy's gonna move on. Good for her. Next up we have the NARS Summer Unrated eyeshadow palette, and this one is going up against ColourPop The Child. This one is difficult because we have green versus neutral, but thankfully for me, I just finished No Panning Left Behind this palette, and while I like it, it's just not a standout green eyeshadow palette in my collection anymore. So I'm gonna give it to NARS Summer Unrated. This one's gonna be moving on, and ColourPop The Child is going home. All right, next up we have Glaminatrix Fairy Lights versus Melt Smoke Sessions. This is another really difficult one. I love the 6 green metallic shades in this palette. Also love these 6 metallic shades in this palette. Don't necessarily love the shimmers in this, but I think I'm gonna have to give it to Smoke Sessions. I just think this is such a fun green color story, and I do really enjoy this one, but I feel like I would be more sad if this was missing from my collection than this. So Melt Smoke Sessions is gonna be moving on. All right, next up, this one I feel like would seem like a no-brainer, but I'm struggling with this one. And this is the Odenzai Norns palette versus the Amartine Crystal Quad from Aether Beauty. This is such a solid quad and creates such a beautiful look, but it's a quad and you're so limited in your looks. And then we have this palette, which I feel like the color story feels a bit discombobulated, and I feel limited with this color story just because I don't really know what to do, but I also love the shade Charming. But I actually think I'm gonna give it to the Amartine Crystal Quad. I'm a little bit shocked myself, but Amartine Crystal Quad, she's moving on. All right, next up, this one isn't really fair because we know how much I love Glaminatrix Nearly Natural. It's going against Scooby-Doo 2, but Scooby-Doo 2, I'm sorry you're going home, and Nearly Natural is going to be advancing to the next round. Then we have the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 5 eyeshadow palette, and this is against another really beautiful indie brands palette. This is the Clarity Cosmetics So Amazing palette. This has 6 shimmers and 6 mattes. I will say I definitely prefer this palette for the shimmers, but this has 18 beautiful, beautiful shimmers. And it's really no question, Danessa Myricks is moving on. Right, next up we have 2 newer palettes to me going against one another. I have the Danessa Myricks Groundworks palette versus the NARS Afterglow Irresistible eyeshadow palette. And this one is tough because I really just reach into this palette for my brows, but I reach into this every single day. So I actually think it's definitely going to Danessa Myricks Groundworks. I do really like this one from NARS, but if I had to choose one to keep, it would be Groundworks. Then another NARS palette, I have the NARS Rising Orgasm palette against the Artist Couture Supreme Nudes eyeshadow palette. I've really, really loved both of these eyeshadow palettes throughout their lives in my collection. But Summer Solstice already moved on, and this one's really similar. And I also just love Supreme Nudes. So Supreme Nudes is gonna reign superior, and it's gonna move on to the next round. Then we have Dose of Colors Sassy Siennas, and this one is going up against ColourPop's Going Coconuts, and I'm gonna have to give this one to Going Coconuts just because I feel like this one has more everyday versatility in terms of just creating like a base look. So we're going Coconuts for this round. Next up, we have Melt Rust versus NARS Suede. I'm gonna go with Melt Rust. Need I say more? I don't know. Odenzai Alva versus Flying Fiddles from Adept, and that is so difficult. Because I do really like this, but I'm gonna have to go Flying Fiddles. Like, it actually is not that difficult. I do really love this palette, but I do love Odin's Eye Outfit, so it's hard to like say goodbye to that. And then the final, ooh, this one's tough. Okay, the final battle is Kaleidos Flower Punk versus Lethal Cosmetics Wildflower. Okay, this is really, really difficult because I really like both of these. Like, I feel like this one offers like more fun shimmers, but I just love the color story in this, especially like the grungier greens. Oops, I'm seeing that I'm needing to press this shade back in. Okay, I'm gonna give this one to Kaleidos Flower Punk. I actually really love this eyeshadow palette and would be really sad not to have this in my collection, so Flower Punk is gonna be moving on. Okay, you guys, and after that, that concludes round 1 of my eyeshadow palette tournament. Tune in a few days for round 2, where, you know, all of the palettes that advanced from round 1 to round 2 will be going up against each other head to head. So there will be 80 eyeshadow palettes that have advanced from round 1 that we will see in a few days go against each other in round 2 to see who will become the ultimate palette champion. I would love to know in the comments below in this video, which palette do you think is going to reign superior? Do you think it's going to be like Natasha Denona Gold, Glaminatrix Nearly Natural? Like, do we think it's going to be one of those? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Other than that, that's going to wrap it up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.